Bread in the Desert, taken up by Thomas Merton in his solitude. We need nourishment. Unfortunately, over the civilized world, there is fairly little quiet, classical reading of solid books going on. The time has gone into screens, and it's not the same, and the nourishment is not at all the same. The psychology of internet is aggressive, immediate, and addictive. A book is not. Moreover, the words and nourishment coming across the airwaves now come and go, and have the value that they have. They have not stood the test of time. Classical spiritual books have. And we need to be aware that we have a choice. We need solid food. We need safe food. And we don't need aggression in our mind. For a lot of the stuff coming at us, if we're into that or not, but don't want to be, damages the soul. It takes away inner peace and complicates the mind. Whereas a book, we control, we start and stop when we want to, and there is no addiction. When in school, I discovered a secret. It was, so as to maintain union with the Lord, a practice which works. In those days, of course, going back to the 70s, there was only the solid book. And the art of approaching it could be done in a quiet mode like this. Choosing carefully what time was to be apportioned to each one, especially when one is under exam pressure. But then this little bit, especially with certain books, like history and geography, a pause at the end of a paragraph, a tiny one, so as to look inwards. The guest inside received at Holy Communion and refelt in the course of the day. For we do not park the communion when we come out of church. In those days we were blessed because after the council, concelebration didn't come in just like that, and a church with 7 priests had 7 masses, and they all wanted water boy. I make a jump. That is how it has been approached over the centuries. And in the desert, there were very few books. So the mind was full of precious words. And they might go to an elder. Father, give me a word. And the apophthegmata, the sayings of the fathers, come down to us are none other than those gems. Now, in the Christian soul, in a state of grace, there is by nature this gravitation towards the beloved, the guest in the heart, and the word in the mind, for he is logos and truth. And there are certain situations that favour it maximally and others that disfavour it. And we are in control of the choice upstream. Not too far from us in the monastery in Italy, was this. Now, you can't see it very well, but I'll tell you what it is. It's a rock, and in it is a sword, planted up to the hilt. It was a knight, Gargano, who had been touched by grace, abandoned the whole military career, sought a grotto, a quiet place, and put his sword there in the rock. There it will stay. I leave the world and what it represents behind. Henceforth, I only want Jesus. And he used this miraculous implanting of the hilt into the rock as his cross. What would he have found way back? the unchanging sound of silence. How often do you hear, in the course of the 24 hours, the unchanging sound of silence? It's not an indifferent choice to open a gadget that cancels the unchanging sound of silence. A modern gadget, according to its nature, will immediately cancel the silence and actually be so invasive tendentially that it will completely invade the whole mind. One can't now work in many a workplace and be in prayer mode because there's background, aggressive, thumping, and usually vulgar noise in the background. Piped music, pumped music, which is not music at all. We don't have to have it in our short innings upon earth. But there is more. By now, the devil has found this great means to bring down humanity in such a way that they are living outside themselves. And he's got them absent from themselves and from their king and from the reality of life, because they cannot by now stop and think. Moreover, if one listens to souls, there is by now over the planet a tendency to be in some kind of attachment which is actually more than attachment, it is genuine addiction. Don't fool yourself, the smartphone is addictive, but there are many things that are addictive. We are, as the first reading puts it, in bondage. Do you know that a person who has understood one secret can find freedom with the Lord's grace, and another can't? It's this: to abdicate, to have no desire or preference at all, other than one only, the divine will, in whatever form it presents itself. In such a way that I have no preference as to how I serve the Lord or what the future holds. I do not exist on the level of the will. I have given it completely. This must be our prayer. Lord, I only want what you want. You can do anything at all. At all. Now, do you see that that mode gives a huge liberty, that we are not in any way frustrated or distressed, because this too is a sentence of the Alpha and the Omega, who speaks in his providence and in the event that happens. A person, on the other hand, who insists, and before all other humans will insist, that it must be so, will not be at peace himself, and will not let other people be in peace either. And he will go through life from pain to pain. Why? Because he's created pain of desire. Until he dies, dies to himself and his will, he will be in pain of frustration. And that is all matter that will come up at our comeuppance, the state of our soul at the moment of death. And we may think we've got it right. I've got news for you. Like a story. Like a story that makes your hair stand on end. Are you sitting uncomfortably? Then I shall begin. In the year 1870, says this bishop, I saw, or at least touched at Foligno near Assisi in Italy, something what I'm about to describe. On November the 4th, 1859, they died of a stroke of apoplexy at the convent of the Tertiary Franciscans of Foligno, a good sister named Teresa Gesta. She had been for many years mistress of novices, at the same time in charge of the poor little clothes room of the monastery. Goes into some details of her life, when she was born, when she entered, and she was, it says, well prepared for death. 12 days afterward, on the 6th of November, a sister named Anna Felicia, who replaced her in her office, went up to the wardrobe and was about to enter when she heard moans, which seemed to come from the interior of this room. Somewhat alarmed, she hastened to open the door. No one was there. But new moans resounded, so clearly articulated that despite her usual courage, she felt seized by fear. She cries out to Jesus and Mary, "What is this?" And she heard a plaintive voice with a mournful sigh, crying out to God, "How I suffer! Che peno tanto." The shocked sister recognized at once the voice of poor Sister Teresa. Then the whole hall was filled with a dense smoke, and the ghost of Sister Teresa appeared, moving toward the door while gliding along by the wall. Having almost reached the door, she exclaimed forcibly, "This is a sign of the mercy of God." Saying that, she struck the highest panel of the door, leaving hollowed in the charred wood a most perfect stamp of her right hand. Then she disappeared. Sister Anna Felicia had remained half dead with fear. "Help!" One of her companions hastened to her, then another, then the whole community. They pressed eagerly around her, and they smelled this wood, all burnt and charred. She told them just taken place and showed them the stamp on the door. They recognized immediately the shape of that sister's hand because it was very small. They ran to the choir and began to pray, spent the night praying and doing penances for the deceased, and they all received Holy Communion the following morning. Other communities of Franciscans heard about it and continued their prayers as well. Then, on November the 18th, Sister Anna Felicia, having retired to her cell to go to bed, heard herself called by her name. It was that familiar voice of the little sister. At the same time, an all-resplendent sphere of light appeared before her, lighting up the cell as if at noonday. And she heard her voice, but this time joyous and triumphant. "I died on Friday, the day of the Passion. Behold, on a Friday, I depart for glory. Be brave in carrying the cross. Be courageous in suffering. Love poverty. Addio, addio, addio. She became transfigured into a thin, white, dazzling cloud. She flew away to heaven and vanished. The bishop was informed. They opened the grave and they took measurements, and it was exactly the hand in question in the stamp. This, my friends, is an indication that even a holy nun was in trouble. What will be our case if we die today? How much unfinished business? How much rime on our soul? Because we didn't take care of the only thing that mattered. And we frittered away our life in addictions that we weren't aware of and couldn't face head on the Alpha and the Omega and listen to his voice. That actually has a happy story ending. The bit that follows doesn't. And it could be the case of somebody right now passing into the beyond. 2 per second. Peter Damien speaks of a typical worldling who lived only for amusement and pleasure. To no purpose was he advised to think of his soul. To no purpose was he warned that by following the life of the wicked rich man, he should reach the same end. He continued his guilty life unto death. He had scarcely ceased to live when an anchorite, a hermit, knew of his damnation. He saw him in the midst of a fiery pool. It was an immense pool like a sea, which a great number of people, howling with despair, were plunged. They were striving to gain the shore, but it was guarded by pitiless dragons and demons who prevented them from coming near and hurled them back, far back into the ocean of flames. Now this was shown to the little children of Fatima for our good. Our Lady wanted us to be aware that there's no myth. The big question is if we're ready or not at the moment of death. There's no coming back, my friends. And the life that we have, we will think about forever, and the misuse we made of grace.